most popular video that I have ever posted on YouTube is the one describing the live rig that I use in the Queen tribute band. That is my bread and butter as a live performing guitarist. And it's fascinating to me that that's the case, because it means that a lot of people probably see that it's not so wacky an idea, but it is something that's kind of useful. So before I start going through the gear and all that type of stuff, and this video will have an index if you want to skip past me talking about things you already know, I wanted to explain why I use a computer on stage, and then we'll look at the how and different gear and all that type of stuff. I actually own one of these. This is a Quad Cortex, and this is the doyen of multi-effects processors, and rightly so. It's quite cool. Look at the size of it. It's so small. It's very light. It's very easy to get around, and I have actually gigged with it, but I have gone back to using the computer, and the reasons why are the reasons why you would use a computer in the first place. So let's have a look at that. The Helix, for example, which is the thing I was using before I moved into plugins on stage, is amazing. It is stuff full of stuff. But here's the thing. When Line 6 bring out something really cool, like the polycapo or some of the really cool pitch shifting effects, a lot of these things, they take up extra resources, extra processing power, and you're limited still to what these devices can give you back in terms of processing. Now, the win with the Quad Cortex is there's a lot of processing power, but the downside is, unlike the Helix, it doesn't have the same range of tools and effects and such that you might need to construct the sound. And I'm quite particular about the sound, because the sound that I'm doing is, you know, it's signature. It's Brian May's guitar tone. It's one of the best known in the business. Plus, I have commercial constraints as well. Can I get set up quickly? I mean, the shows that we're doing at the moment, I have to travel very far. We have to sound check a full choir. Two of the lads are using in-ears. Anyone that's in the band with people that use in-ears, they know that it takes time to get that mix right, even when you have your own sound engineer. So I don't want to be a burden. I want to have good sound on stage. I want to have good sound out front, and I want something that's reasonably portable. Now, this is great. It is very portable, and it sounds fantastic, and I have done 2 gigs with it. It doesn't sound as good. And the reason why it doesn't sound as good is that I'm missing a lot of the tools that I use to process the sound. Things that are designed for guitarists tend not to be designed for sound engineering, and don't seem to be as powerful. That's another sort of downside for the multi-effects units, is that the marketing department might creep in and go, well, guitarists don't understand that, so we won't put that in there, or we'll hide it somewhere else, like putting an automatic noise gate as the Tone Master does, or you know, having strange compression when you model an amp or capture an amp, like this thing seems to do. So I prefer to have that control because I know how to use it, and I think you should know how to use it too, but we might look at that again in further videos. So the why is we remove the ceiling of the processing, but we also remove the ceiling of what the manufacturers offer us as well. So we don't have to wait for an update for something. We can mix technologies. At the start of the year, for example, I was actually using the polycapo. Our singer was sick. We had a singer that required key changes, and I was using Line 6's plugin ahead of AmpliTube's plugin set to just drop the pitch for a few songs, so I didn't have to swap guitars or have down tuning or, God forbid, learn them in another key. So that's the why. So let's have a look and see how this all comes together in terms of the hardware, and then I'll show you what happens on the computer afterwards. And if there's any questions, that could be another video. So let's put this away and have a look at what we've got. So the first thing I want to show you is something that's of universal utility for all guitarists, and this is a D'Addario, actually I don't know what it's called. I think it's a D'Addario gig bag, and it's just an equipment bag. But what I really love about it is there's pockets everywhere, and the middle section can be configured as well. So in other words, you can have the bottom section for leads, or you can have it as one single piece, which I really like. But these pockets are quite generous and quite useful. And when I put all of the stuff that I use for the gig into it, I can stack my pedals on top, and it all goes into one bag. The biggest drawback I have with this rig, by the way, is it's still too heavy for me. And since I made that video, the last one that I'll link below, I have made it lighter, but it could be lighter again. And we'll come back to that topic throughout. Okay, let's have a look and see what's inside. So the first point I want to discuss, I suppose, is what's actually providing the processing. Now, this hard case contains 2 items. It contains a interface, the IK Multimedia AXIO, which I have discussed at length and as being a big favorite of mine. And it has a Mac Mini. I don't know if you can see that there. Whoops. And that's 2023's Mac Mini. And the one, excuse me, that has come out this year is even much more powerful. Now, the first thing I'll say about the choice of the computer is I'm a Mac user, and I really am not interested in getting on these iPhone, Android, Windows, Mac things. But I ran a business before and I got rid of Windows Output because I just found that the overhead in terms of dealing with support and breakdowns was too high. And I have never looked back. I've been Mac all the way since then because they do just work unless you do something a bit silly with them. But we don't do anything silly here. This one has a very powerful processor. And the thing about audio processing is it's not the same as what the marketing people in Apple might tell you is a huge leap. So in other words, my laptop, for example, has an M1 Pro Max processor in it. And I think this one is the M2. But if you're doing audio, the difference between the two is actually, it's not really there. And it's only maybe every other or second generation after your processor with Apple stuff that seems to improve what processing requires. Now, I'm not an IT man or a computer scientist, so I'm not going to get into explanation of that. But, you know, the newest isn't always the best. So you don't have to be beating yourself up if you don't have the latest Mac or MacBook. Now, the other thing is it's a Mac Mini. So why am I using that and not a MacBook? Well, when I started doing this, I did use a MacBook and I had it up on a lovely stand and it was all great. It was all in one nice unit. But one day it got knocked over and the screen was destroyed. And replacing that screen in terms of sourcing it and the cost was terrifying. So I would say you can, yes, of course, definitely do this with a laptop style computer. But if you are going to do that, make sure you have a way of protecting it. I don't really feel confident doing that. I have done it once on a fly rig, so if I'm going abroad, I'll probably do it and I'll have the thing on the table if the stage is big enough, but I wouldn't bring it into a pub or a small stage because the dangers are really there. What's great about this thing is it's easy to protect. I can put it into this rack case and I can look after it, but it presents another challenge, which is how do you see what's on the screen? And I'll have a look at that now in a moment. But just to say then on the interface side, I have the AXIO. Now, it's kind of funny. You kind of see a lot of negativity about all interfaces online because I think a lot of guitarists are just still a lot more confused about how they work and what causes latency and stuff like that. So if somebody has an interface and they don't know how the computer interacts with it or they use the wrong drivers, yeah, the latency can start to creep up. Or if you're using something really old, it might be less than ideal. But there's nothing wrong with this interface. It's actually quite good. And the thing that I really like about it is it's so resilient. I've been gigging with this interface for nearly 3 years now. Actually, it is more than 3 years. And it has never let me down. And the only weak point in it that I found is this thing, because it does use one of these wall warts and it suffers from the limitations of one of them. And this one has actually died on me. Ideally, it would be bus powered, but look, that's just how it is. What I really like about it, though, is that, you know, other than its resilience, and I do run it quite high, is it has the built-in preamp, has a built-in JFET preamp and the ability to change the impedance, which really does make a difference. It's not something you wouldn't notice, I suppose, if you're the type of guitarist that keeps the volume in guitar up full. But when you're doing Brian May stuff, you're actually working the volume pot a lot, and being able to have just sort of fine control as to setting that really helps the guitar and the treble booster that I also use in the front of this talk better with the ToneX profiles that I'm using. So it's really good interface for that type of work. The other thing that I really like about it, it's absolutely essential, is this has 2 stereo outs that are discrete. So what does that mean? One of the things that always blows my mind when I see people's digital rigs is that they don't use all of the outs. And very often the outs that they give the sound man are the same as the ones that they use for their monitoring. Now, this is a thing that people really need to think about. If you're using in-ears, the type of EQ profile, you might even have some reverb or some other stuff going on, it's going to be something that you don't want to give to the sound man because it'll probably be much more bass heavy than they need. It'll probably be a lot dimmer on the treble. You know, it's a different type of thing. And, you know, if you're in a really big band and you have a monitoring engineer and a sound engineer, then great for you, because then, you know, it doesn't matter what you send out. The guy in charge of your monitoring is going to take care of you for that, and the sound man is going to do his thing, and that's great. For most people, they don't have that. You're your own sound engineer very often. And having 2 separate outs means that when we come to the software side of it, I can have a sound that's for me on stage, and I can control it on stage. If it's too boomy, I can lob out bass, or if it's too low, I can turn it up and down. But what I give to the sound man is nothing to do with what I have control over. It's literally just a flat, straight out, it's all yours, and I can't change it unless I really have to get into menus and stuff like that. So I don't interrupt their work. So that's kind of important. So It all lives in this box. This is a 2U half rack case. Now the half rack format is kind of a bit of a rare one. Most rack cases are obviously twice the width of this, but this is 9.5 inches. Apologies for the imperial measurements, but that's what they use. And I got this from the German retailer Thomann, and I think they're about the only people I found that actually sell these, which is really annoying, because the interfaces are generally a half rack size. So what I had to do is I had to buy these little shelves, and what I've done is I've taken the wings off the XIO, slammed it in there with a bit of Velcro, and the shelves are vented, so there's little holes in them so any heat can pass through it. And similarly for the MacBook, it's also Velcroed onto a shelf, but you know, or MacBook, excuse me, the Mac Mini. The Mac Mini has its own sort of air intake system. I actually have never seen it happen. So I haven't done a gig yet where I've seen the fans or heard the fans engage, because it's just that efficient of a processor. But if it needs to, it has an open back at the back here, so it can, you know, take in any ventilation that it needs. This has never crashed on me. I have played so many gigs with this in so many different places. I've played outside in the cold. I've played in wonderful Irish rain, and it just keeps giving. It just doesn't stop. It has not fallen over. I have had problems with the Helix before. I've only done 3 gigs with the Quad Cortex, and I had problems on the 3rd gig with it. So this idea that because it's on the computer it's somehow more unstable is kind of old hat. I won't speak for a Windows machine because I personally just don't trust them. And I'm sure if you know what you're doing, you can probably get a stable result from that. But for me, I know what I'm doing with this. I keep it simple. I do keep it demanding in terms of what I ask of it, but I don't have a million things running at once. I'm not checking my email in between songs or watching the latest episode of some Netflix series or anything like that. It's doing work when it's turned on. So that's that. I'm going to plug it in and set it up and answer probably the biggest question that people are asking, which is how do I control it and what do I see on stage? And it's actually still the same as per my last video, but let's plug it all up and plug it all in, and we'll just see what that looks like. Okay, that's it all put together. And this is it really. I'm using an iPad. Now, this was covered in my last video, but just to explain it again. Don't really need to have a mouse and keyboard with me because I'm not really doing that type of work. Touchscreen is perfectly fine for it. So, I mean, when I turn this thing on, the only thing I really want to do is open Mainstage and off I go. I don't have to configure anything. When I get to the controller, you'll see what I mean by that. But like right now, I've opened up Mainstage. If I had this thing all plugged in with a guitar, this thing is ready to go. And the only reason why I need a screen at all really is just open Mainstage. But if something does go wrong, I have some ability to be able to do something about it. So what you can do with a Mac and an iPad is you can actually use the iPad as a monitor and as a touchscreen. And there's 2 apps that work with that. Now, I know there's Sidecar, but what we're talking about here is using the iPad as the primary monitor of the Mac. So in other words, as soon as the computer comes on, it sees this as being a monitor. Now, what I actually use is this thing here, which is called Luna Display, and specifically an app that they have called Astrolab. And what it has is a little dongle that goes into one of the USB-C ports, and that basically tells the computer that this is the primary monitor, in the same way as if you plugged in something with a HDMI cable or something like that. And then you use their app, Astrolab, and what you have then is basically a touchscreen, and it's full, proper, you know, full high-res display. There's very little latency with it. And if I need to, I can pull out a keyboard. I have to do that so irregularly that I can barely remember how to do it, but there is a keyboard there and you can have access to some of the minor keys there as well, like the Alt key and all of that type of stuff. But generally, you don't need to do that. I turn it on and it's ready to go. Ideally, if I was building one of these things again, I'd have something that would have, you know, maybe some sort of a tablet-based system. But the problem is that the software that I use isn't available on iOS yet. And that's the biggest problem that I'm having at the moment, is that I have to use Mac because ultimately the other stuff just isn't available to run on the iPad. And that really sucks because iPad is extremely capable now. These things are running processors as powerful as the laptops themselves. So I'm kind of hoping eventually that most of this can disappear and I could just run on one of these. That said, if something did go wrong with the Mac itself, or even with the Mac and the interface, I could still do a gig with the iPad. And the reason why I can do that is I do have software, and I've covered this before, that can approximate my live tone, and it all runs on that. So it's this basically, and this can live beside me on stage or off stage on a table or wherever. But generally it's away from me because I don't cable into it. I use a wireless. Now the wireless I use, and we've probably seen this on a million boards, I use the Shure GLX set. This is a GLX D6 Plus receiver. I can't remember what the set is called, but this is fantastic. It works in the 5 gigahertz bandwidth stage. It's transparent. It's great. I'm not doing a review about it because plenty of people have done, and it works perfectly. So the next question is, how do I get that sound to the sound man? I use one of these. That's a stereo DI. This one is Walrus Audio's Canvas Stereo. It's a passive DI. Now, the outputs out of the AXIO are actually balanced line outputs. So theoretically, you could run them straight into the desk if you just convert them from jack to XLR. But I choose to use one of these when sending them to the desk because I don't know what would happen if someone sent phantom power by accident back down those cables into my interface. It's a bit of a mystery. I'm not going to experiment to find out because if it's a bad thing, it could destroy it, and that'll be a very expensive day out. So the main use of this is not just to convert the jacks into XLRs, but also just if phantom does inversely come down the line, that it protects the interface. Plus, it's always handy to have one of these. If, again, I had to use the iPad and another interface on stage, I'd still very definitely need this to be able to get signal back out. And again, in case of an emergency, this has a pair of true outputs. So in other words, I can get a signal that will run my own monitoring as well as pass a balanced signal back up to the desk. So this is an amazing tool to have. After that, the next question then is, how do I hear myself on stage? Now, I'll probably cut in some lovely video of the speakers I use, but I'm an FRFR person, and specifically I use stereo. Now, generally when we go through forums, we see people like to use just a single speaker or maybe one of those new Fender ones that should turn out to be quite popular. I'm stuck with stereo because you're spoiled when you use it. Now, I'm not doing a type of gig where it's like the Edge, where there's big wide panning delays, although there is a little bit of that. The reason why I like stereo is that it's a wet-dry setup. So in other words, one of the amps has chorus, one of the amps is dry-ish, if you like, and then on occasion then there'll be mixes of harmonizers and other things like that. But the sound itself is inherently stereo. And if you use a single mono speaker, you actually lose a lot of the high end because they phase cancel when you squash them down into one speaker. So if you're, doing a tone that sounds good in stereo, when you put it into mono, it very often loses a lot of its top end, which is less than ideal. So I use 2 wedge speakers for that. It doesn't really matter which ones. As it happens, I use the QSC ones, the CB8s, because they're small and they're light. But on a bigger stage, I'd probably ask for something that'd be 10 inches minimum. Anything beyond 12 is too big, I think, because it throws the sound kind of past you. But I like to have those in front of me. But it doesn't really matter. If you want to use in-ears, then there's a pair of stereo outs that can go into a mixer and run that. You can use whatever you like with it. But for me, it's speakers, and that's the way I have it set up. Now, the next question is, how do I control it? So I'll just show you my pedal board, which I have ably available here. And basically what we've got here is a Morningstar MC6 Pro. Now, I was using the MC6 up until recently, but I had to change this because I just couldn't see it anymore. The contrasting display is actually very important here because, it just makes it a lot more visible. Now, this pedal is far more powerful than I need it to be because when you get into this, you'll see that I only use it for preset changes and sending CC commands. But the fact that it is available to me to do other things is also very useful. So if I have to do something else in the gig, like change a light scene or start a backing track, theoretically I could program it through this. Now, there is a cable through this, but it's purely for power. This is all powered through USB-C. So I actually have a USB-C power adapter underneath it. And I'm a complete advocate for USB-C in guitar rigs, primarily because it's just so ubiquitous. So in other words, like if you can run everything off USB-C, you'll never be stuck for a transformer because there's always some sort of PD power supply that could be got in literally any shop, be it a service station to a local corner shop. So it's always easy. So I have a 100-watt PD adapter underneath here, and the reason why I have that is I also power cameras that we use to film the gigs from that. So I could have the iPhone plugged into that, just taking juice from that. And also the 360 cam that we use for a lot of our videos there as well. So it's just very handy. Plus, I could just be charging my phone either, so I don't have to talk to the drummer on the way home. So it's just a very handy way of doing things. This flashing light here is a wide-eye jack, and this is the only thing I don't like about the MC6 Pro, which is that it doesn't have one of these built into it. And basically what this thing does is it uses wide-eye or a form of Bluetooth to talk to the Mac Mini. So basically, once this thing powers up, it immediately connects to the Mac Mini and I can immediately start changing presets. This pedal here, it's just some extra buttons. So basically what I've got in front of me, just so I don't know if you can see the display too clear, I'll just bring it a bit closer, is I have these ascribed to pedals. So they might do things like turn on a modulation effect or turn on delay, or it could be a lead boost or something like that, but I know what they are. And these ones down here are presets. And this one down here is always the harmonizer, because the harmonizer is the one sound that if I hit it, everybody really know that it has arrived, because it's quite a big sound. Over here, I have, these are for controlling just the banks. So bank up and bank down, so I can find just different sounds. And the one in the middle, and very deliberately here because it's a nice big space, is that's for tapping tempo. So when I'm doing delays, to keep the delays in time is very important to me. And that just keeps that right. So we do songs like Queen's D's or Days of Our Lives, and there's a wonderful solo on that has a very prominent delay part, so that has to be in time. The same with Seven Seas of Rye and a few other bits in the gig where you just have to have those things just beat sync. So I always have that ready to go there. So that's how it's controlled, and it's all just on this pedal train Nano. Now again, I'd love to have it smaller. I'd love to have maybe all of this in one box, but for some reason in the market at the moment, MIDI controller pedals tend to come just in groups of 8, where I'd argue 9 or 10 might be a more useful amount. And the other thing, of course, as well, is that they very often don't have a display as useful as this. And they don't very often have a software as useful as the software that comes with this in terms of programming. I can get through and set up presets and manage things on this very easily and very quickly. And that's worth money to me, really and truthfully. So heartily recommend this. It does more than I can ever get it to do. So if you really want to take it for a drive, it'll grow with you. It's powered over USB-C. You can power it over 9 volt as well. And you can hook ridiculous amounts of additional switches into them, and also configure this screen any way that you like it. So heartily recommend that. And Pedal Train Nano was just the right choice as well for that. It's nice and light. It doesn't have a mad profile and keeps everything stuck together. Obviously, there's Velcro everywhere. The power supply is Velcroed in. The little dongle that does the wide eye is Velcroed in as well. So that's the hardware. And I suppose now what I'll show you is just how it's all put together on the software side. And just to remember as I go through this, that I did this once, and I don't go near it again unless I have to do a substantial change that is related to the show. So we'll have a look, and we'll just move over to the computer next, and we'll see how that goes. Now, I've gone back to the laptop for this just purely because it's easier to record the screen on it, but all of this applies to the rig I just showed you. Okay, so just from a software point of view, I'm using the Mac, but I'm using Mainstage for Mac. So what is Mainstage for Mac? So for all of this stuff, keyboard players have the best insights. They've been through all of this for centuries. And guitarists have been the Luddites in the band, but keyboard players know best. And they would use Mainstage for using their software, synths and sounds, and organize them in the way that we would use multi-effects like Helix or Quad Cortex. And because they don't move around as much on stage, it has been such a big deal for them, and their knowledge is where you need to get your insights from. So why bother? You could just run AmpliTube standalone app, or you could just use Neural in or any of their plugins just in a DAW. So that's fine. The reason why Mainstage is great is because it's like a mixing desk, and it just manages the ins and outs just very, very well. So I'm recording the screen here, so we'll just have a little look and see what type of things we have going on. So when I originally was setting this up, I was trying to use their sort of suggested way of the MIDI implementation, but I do something different now. And it's really simple, really. The MIDI that comes out of the pedal over Bluetooth into the computer, it goes straight into AmpliTube. So kind of a strange way of setting up Mainstage to make that work. And if anybody is stuck setting up Mainstage at any point, I do offer assistance on that, so you can reach out to me if you're stuck. But in any case, the way this works is on channel 1, we have an instrument channel that's running AmpliTube. And basically, by doing things this way, it allows me to send MIDI directly from the pedal straight into AmpliTube itself. So Mainstage has no role in the MIDI. It's purely about pushing audio around the place. So let's have a look at the rest of the chain. Now, there's loads of experiments here, so this is a bit messy. So what you need to focus in on is that the instrument chain, it comes out on output 1 and 2 generally, okay? And it has a little bus end, and the bus end here, and you can see it, is going to output 3 and 4. So in other words, my main sound comes out of output 1 and 2, but I also just send the same thing out of AmpliTube, which is before I do anything else with it, to output 3 and 4, and that goes on to the front of house. So what does output 3 and 4 get? Now, at the moment, nothing really. There is an EQ here, but it has a slight mid boost, and that was only something I did just to help somebody out at a gig recently. Generally, nothing is done to the signal. And in terms of what the soundman themselves do to the signal, it's usually just room correction stuff. So they very rarely do anything with my guitar tone, because I do a lot of things already that they would expect to have happen. So I don't have any, sub-harmonics coming out on the frequency side. I cut all of that out. So everything under 80 hertz, gone. And the rest of the sound is designed to work loud. So I will play a little bit as we go through this section, but it'll sound a little bit muddy, because when you get that signal and you make it louder, the high end and the low end become disproportionately louder. So it'll sound a bit dull as I play through it now, but that's only because it'll be a multiple louder on stage, and I don't want it getting out of hand. So let's have a look and see what I do for my stage monitoring. So that's this channel here, and I have additional plugins here. Now, again, some of these are legacy stuff. So when I was using one monitor, I was using this gain plugin, for example, to sum the signal for me in a way that was just less annoying than taking a lead out of one side. And I had an additional EQ just to brighten it again, because a lot of the high end had phase cancelled out, as I described earlier. So that those things are just legacies from that. The thing that I do that's of most interest is, first of all, I have this graphic EQ. Now, this is really something that I should have baked into my preset, but sometimes I get inspiration and I use this because it's just a little bit easier to work than the stuff that's in AmpliTube. But basically, my tone, it's broadly good when you bring it up loud, but I found that it was a little bit boxy on stage, and this is sort of typical actually even with the real Vox AC30 amps, that when you do mic them up and put them through a PA, it does help a little bit to do a little bit of a cut. And I reckon it's around 400 hertz, very thin cut, and you can see that I've done it there. You can see here, just to make sure that there's no sub-harmonics or frequencies coming out here, I do a cut below 100 hertz, and that's just, just make sure that there's nothing that's going to upset me on stage. Sometimes I play on stages, and the last gig I played was in a 250-year-old theatre, so it was rather old, and everything was made out of wood, which was making my floor monitor sound a little bit woofier than normal. So that cut I had to turn on just to make sure that it was okay. But generally I could leave it off most of the time, because the AmpliTube cut already takes care of that. This is just personal choice, and again, something I have to put into my presets. It's just a little dip at the higher mids. And again, this is just something that I'm doing because that frequency seems to become over accentuated when you put the thing up loud, okay? So that's why that cut is there. And finally, and this is something that is again to do with things getting louder, the shrillness. If the guitar tone sounds too shrill up loud, for the Brian May tone, I find that it's usually just past 3K. So I take a little bit of that out. So that's all what you're kind of hearing now. But wait, there's more. When you do sort of digital modeling or profiling or anything like that, we do a very interesting thing in that we capture the amp as it is at a sensible volume, okay? And when you hear me talking about what happens when things get louder, things change, perception of volume changes when sounds get louder. It's called the Fletcher Munsen effect, and you can Google that one. We're not going to do a big science lesson on it, but the long and short of it is, the reason why your guitar sounds not as good on stage as it did at home is because you've made it louder. And your perception of the low end and the upper middle and the high end, it sort of distorts as the thing gets louder. So it doesn't get louder evenly. The shrill gets shriller and the boom gets boomier. So you do need to manage that. Now, people start going, oh, well, my guitar amp never did that. Well, your guitar amp couldn't do that. And the reason why is that your guitar amp had a speaker in it that works a bit like a compressor in an equalization curve. And what would happen is that as you would put that thing up to full volume, and let's be honest, we all did that as often as we could get away with it, what happens is the speaker is nowhere else to go. So any of that shrill high end that could happen, it clamped down on it like a compressor. It started to shove it back down, which is a delightful sound. And this is one of the reasons why we like to have guitar amps, real ones, up loud, is because the speaker and the power amp section, they do actually work as a compressor on the thing, which makes it sound like more singy. It just makes the feedback, the nice feedback, happen more easily. And overall, it's a very pleasing sound. It's Brian May sound, it's Rory Gallagher sound. that speaker that was on that Fox AC30, it was literally clamping down all the bad stuff, all that shrillness. And the thing about it is, when we do a model and we do it at sensible volumes, we can capture that, and we do capture that. But what happens is then is we plug it into speakers that, you know, haven't, you know, been maxed out to start compressing things down again, and we make things loud again, and we cause that effect to happen again. So one of the biggest problems with digital modeling that none of the multi-effects providers have really solved is that. And the common advice is to simply take a big, huge EQ curve, much like what I have here, and do something like this, and just take all the treble off it. And that will work to a point. But if you have a very sophisticated sound, and like I say, the one that I work with is very sophisticated, it has a lot of high-end content that you want to keep that you wouldn't normally keep in the guitar, in the very high-end, very bell-like notes. Doing something like this just kills all of that. Now, you'll get through the gig and it'll be fine and nothing will hurt your ears. But I think that there is a better way. And anyone that's in the manufacturing game, please start building this into the units. Put it not into patch level, just put it in the master bus with EQ, because this is the solution. So I have one of these. Sorry, that's off. Yeah, great. Now, and that is a quad band compressor. Oh Jesus, what is he on about today? Okay, so let me explain what's going on here. We all, well, not all, most of us might use a compressor as an effect sometimes. Like if we're playing a lot of funk music, or, you know, if we're actually using it as a bit of a lead boost. We're kind of simulating the effect of what the speaker is doing when we use it as a lead boost, by the way. But the thing about it is that because your guitar isn't a bass guitar, it's not compressing all of the frequencies evenly when you're driving the amp. In other words, you're not shoving a lot of bass in there as well to mush down on it. And if you did, it would sound rubbish, you know. And it's one of the problems that you see with guys that use baritone guitars, or 7-string or 8 or 9 strings or 12-string guitar, not 12 strings, 10-string guitars, is that the low string and managing that bass is always a problem for them. But your regular 6-string guitar doesn't produce that stuff to cause the speaker to clip that way. And if it did, it wouldn't sound very nice. So we're talking about the high end, and using a compressor. All of the compressors that come with, you know, your Helix and your Quad Cortex. Actually, the Helix does have one that's different, but we'll come back to that. But they all are sort of, they work across the frequency band, but they're about the level of the signal that they squash down. And what this thing is it lets you choose which frequencies you're going to compress. So rather than gating down on everything, you can decide, well, you know what, when I hit a note, like when I hit like a high, it's that transient of hitting that high note that really hurts my ear. It's the fact that, you know, that sharpness comes in very quickly. And usually your guitar amp speaker will protect you against that. The simulated speaker won't do that because it doesn't know that it's up, you know, 180 dB or whatever jet engine level you run your rig at. So what's great about this, and I'll just go back to the screen for a minute, you can see, you know, I have that off, I shouldn't have it on. I have this band identified here, and this band starts at just the upper mids, about 1.7K, and it runs up to 4K. And basically what I'm saying is, if for some reason there's one part of the sound of the guitar that comes racing up at that bandwidth, because that's the bit that'll hurt my ear, gently push it back down, but quickly push it back down in the same way as a speaker would do. So that's basically what this thing is doing. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the controls, but I'll just give you a few quick tips. Threshold is when the thing starts to work. And the higher you set it, the more compression you probably get, because that's when it kicks in. Ratio is the strength of the compression. And here's the important ones for guitarists. Because we're dealing with the high end of the guitar, like the click of the pick, or the sixpences I'm using here, against strings, it's the attack that you really need to focus on, and the release. And for me, and it's a great thing with this particular plugin, which is another IK Multimedia one, T-Rex Quad Comp, is you can have it happen very quickly, because it's a quick gate that you want to have slam down on that frequency. So I have a quick gate and a reasonably quick release afterwards. The gain is if you want to change the volume of that signal. Obviously, we're trying to cut it, so I bring it down about 3 dB. So what this does when it's on, I don't know if we can actually hear it here, but I'll just try and simulate it by doing something very screechy. So that's it off now. If I was up very loud, that would probably deafen me. And if I now turn this plugin on, you can see on screen that it'll start. acting on that frequency, and it becomes a very round sound and very much more pleasing to the ear, and very much more like what an amp sounds like, because that's what the amp does, or rather the speaker of the amp specifically. And since I started doing this, I couldn't live without it. And the biggest reason why I can't use the quad cortex is because I don't have that. And anytime I'm trying to manage treble at high volumes, I'm finding that I have to try and find it in the equalization. But guess what? It'll change little bits, and the EQ can't follow it. So you need something that's dynamic. This is dynamic. This is a good solution. So that's the most important innovation that I've put in it since I started doing this. Is that, and that means that I can drive the thing quite loud, and it doesn't cut the ears off me or anyone that happens to step in front of me. Now, the other thing just to bear in mind as well, that the reason why I'm using floor speakers as wedges is because I'm trying to control the sound. It really is only able to be heard by me or anyone behind me, which is the keyboard player who's already blocked off with in-ears. But it means then that I can have a reasonably high volume, which I kind of do need to get feedback and stuff out of this instrument, without, you know, causing problems for the rest of the band. So that's just another point to remember. But because they're close to me and I don't have the atmosphere of the room, if you like, to try and protect me from some of those transient notes, that's another reason why that type of compression is quite useful. Someone please bake this into a pedal and, you know, just let us all have it. Stereo as well, please. Okay, let's have a look at the rest of the chain. So, as I said, the point of this is that we're sending all of the MIDI from this directly into AmpliTube. So AmpliTube is managing its own MIDI for all the different controls. So I'll show you a typical preset that I use, and we'll go back to the screen for that now. Okay, so here we are in AmpliTube. So just to show you just a little bit about how I put together my signal chain, and this preset is actually available on tone.net as well, if you want to try out your own version of it. Now, this is very specific to Brian May, but there's learnings in this, I think, for everybody. And one of my sort of party political sort of broadcasts with this is that I really wish IK Multimedia would take all of this and put it into a pedal like the Quad Cortex. That would be very, very useful. But that's another day's rant, because I'd also need them to have all of the connectivity of the Fender ToneMaster Pro as well, because I think that one has the winning set there. And also have some of the display features of the ToneMaster Pro, because that's quite good. But anyway, this is what we're using today. So let's look at the screen here for the moment. So what I actually have here is sort of a 1980s Brian May rig, if you like. And for those who are new to my channel, I ran a project nearly 2 years ago now, where we went into the studio and spent a lot of time with a Vox AC30 that was extremely ancient, and with some that were more recent, and we captured all of them with an emphasis on just utter total quality of mic placements and phase management and preamps and all of that type of stuff. And most of those captures are also available for free if you just search for my account on tone.net. But anyway, so that's the basis of my rig and has been there for nearly 2 years. So the first thing that you'll see is I do have an optional noise gate. I don't use the noise gate unless I have to. So sometimes I might get into a situation where there's just too much radio or something in the atmosphere that's causing the guitar to act up a little bit too hissy. It is naturally hissy, but it's in the high end. But if it starts to get a little bit funny, I will throw that on. I don't usually use it because I prefer to let the guitar be as clean as it possibly can be. The next thing is a recreation of a Fox phaser. Now, I use two types of modulation. In the 80s, Brian May was using chorus, still uses chorus, but I can switch between the two of those on the pedal board depending on what era of music that I'm trying to play. So that's how that works. Now, there's 2 amps in the chain. It's a wet-dry rig, basically. So Brian May these days is using 3 amps, and I just can't get that to work, because when you have 3 amps, basically you have dry in the middle and the chorus is swimming between the left and the right. Now, to mix that, and I am basically creating a mix here to give to the sound engineer, it's quite difficult, and I honestly don't really hear an advantage to it. If I had 3 separate speakers, I think that would be kind of cool, but since I'm monitoring stereo and not mono stereo, what's 3? Stereo? Not monitoring with 3 speakers, I don't really get any benefit from that. He's using 3 Voxes on stage to do that, so probably, well, I know that it sounds really amazing, but for this type of stuff, I don't think it's necessary. Progressing on, we have a wet amp with chorus in it. Now, I use harmonizers, and I love harmonizers, but one thing that I do that's really, really cool that you cannot do with a floor effects is I run my rig at a sampling rate of 192 kilohertz, which is insane. You shouldn't do that unless you're really confident, because it's really dangerously high processing. Now, why do I do that? I find that I get a better high-end response out of the amplifiers by doing that. You won't hear that at home, but when you have two speakers running at 180 decibels running in your face, you can actually hear that difference, and it does help with things like feedback and your playing dynamic. It's not a huge thing. I wouldn't get hung up on it. I don't want to see the internet full of people going, oh, you have to run your device at 192 kilohertz. You don't. I mean, but I can hear it with this sound, so it does help me. But there is something else that it gives me, though, which is actually tangible and real. And that is that when you're using pitch shifting like harmonizers and stuff like that, a higher sample rate, it's smoother and it works really well. And today I'm running at 48 because I usually record at 48, this is the recording computer. But on stage I'll run at 192, and I find that the pitch tracking and the sound of the harmonizer is a lot clearer, and I think that's very important. Harmonizers, you know, it's a little bit of a magic trick. Like, I mean, I will use it for little sparing parts in the song. Like if we're doing I Want to Break Free for the... And it's funny, you know, I can actually already hear the difference at 48 kilohertz as being different to what I experienced on stage. But anyway, so it's a nice effect to have. But if you're doing them, if you can run a higher sample rate, then great. Can't change that with floor effects. Then I have the speakers, and in this particular preset, I know there's two microphones there, but what I'm actually only using is one, which is a condenser microphone, which you cannot use on stage. You could not possibly use a condenser mic on a Vox going full blast on stage. The thing would die and pick up everything around it. But it's a better mic for this type of work. But you know, because we're virtual, we can actually use it. I have a little bit of room ambience, which I find helps at the high end. On the other amp, I don't. It's just the chorus amp that has just a single mic on it. But just with the high end, I have a little bit of the room coming back at me, and it's set to a studio boot, so it's a bit like the amp in a studio boot. Moving past that, I have some EQ, and I actually have more EQ than I need here. And the reason why I have more EQ than I need is because when I put this sound together, I started with a parametric, and I tweaked with a graphic, and then I used the EQ81, which I've discussed at length before in other videos, as a sort of a sonic expander. Really and truthfully, what this parametric is doing could probably be, well, not probably, definitely replicate between the two of these. I just haven't got to it, and I'm a firm believer in, if it ain't broken, leave it alone. So I don't need that extra slot, so I'm not worried about that. So what's actually happening here is this is cutting out the low end. So you can, I don't know if you can see that on the screen, but from about 53 hertz at a very wide Q, I'm pulling 3 dB out. So in other words, all of that nonsense woof that I don't want coming out is there, gone. And on the mid, I do take a little bit of the 540 hertz out. That was just a personal choice as part of the tone design. And on the high end, I start to take out the sort of the 3K fizz, if you like, and it's just a very slim cut there. On the graphic EQ, again, I'm taking out the low end subs and little bit of mid management that is probably just more superstition than doing anything, you know. But the high end, though, I do use it to take some, again, of the fizzy 3K out at that point. And then I have the EQ81, which is funny because it's a bit like a good old-fashioned Neve channel strip, which I've had the pleasure of using in real life before. And even without me doing any cuts or any equalization with that, it just helps, just works as kind of a very musical compressor already. So I use that as part of the preset. Then there's some delay and some other parametric EQs, which are level boost. So in other words, when I turn on the harmonizer, for example, it turns on a parametric EQ as well, because the harmonizer makes the guitar sound less in volume, if that makes sense. So I have to boost it back up by a couple of dB. And the other one is just the lead boost. And sometimes I do a bit of the Brighton Rock sort of delays, which are the those echoes, and they need a boost to cut through as well. So that's really what's there. That's all it is. And all of those have MIDI assignments to them. And one of the biggest problems with AmpliTube, if you're coming from a Helix or a Quad Cortex, is it doesn't have scenes. So you kind of have to send. So when I send the command to turn on the Brighton Rock delay, I'm basically sending over MIDI one command control thing, but in AmpliTube, I'll just bring this up, sorry, so you can see it, and on the preset level, I'm actually telling the delay to change all of its settings as well. So I changed it from a BPM meter to being, you know, a different type of meter, so it's freer. I changed the filter on the repeats to be brighter. the feedback goes down to just a single pair of repeats. All of that happens with one click, but I have to actually program that into AmpliTube. Whereas if you're doing this in Helix or Helix Native, you could just create a scene and trigger that off the tap of the pedal. But that's how I've had to do it. But the pros of this is like this just sounds very much like Brian May, you know. So. And has proven to be quite resilient and really, really quick to sound check, which I really love because I really don't like sound checking. I like playing the guitar, but not playing the one riff over and over until it's all good. Generally, a couple of strums and I'm ready to go. So that's how the rig is looking this year. It's still ridiculous. And the ridiculous thing is that a lot of the features that I've had to bring in from other places, I really do feel should be part of what is provided in a lot of the pedals. I think that the fact that we don't have multiband compression or multiband limiting in the bigger pedals is insane. There is a variant of it in Helix though, so look that up. And I haven't been able to play around with it, but the problem for Helix with me is the other thing that this gives me, which I have more processing power. If I was to build this preset in Helix, you know, I'd be relying on their amp models, which I don't really like for the Brian May thing. Plus it's big and heavy and all that type of stuff. It's still great, it's just, it's not for me. But, you know, to see what I'm saying, as soon as I start looking what I have here, I just can't see it in the market with other things. But the thing that really annoys me about all of this is that this software should really exist in a smaller format. iPads have long matured, for example, as being a very, very useful computing device, but they're perfect for stage use because they're very easy to protect. Laptops are very difficult to protect. If you're playing big gigs all the time and you have someone looking after your gear, yeah, okay, this could live off stage and you wouldn't have to bother with the stuff I showed you earlier on. But, you know, for people that don't have a tech or don't have stages with wings to hide stuff, you know, having all of this stuff run on an iPad, which is more than capable at this stage, just would be a boon, you know. So that's one thing. A couple of things I will say to people when they do work with people that want to try emulate this type of rig. We do have the laptop conversation and some people are comfortable using that. But some people do want to use the iPad, and there is lots of good software on the iPad and you might actually be able to do a gig with it. I could do a gig on it, I'd just be missing a lot of the stuff that I do love, like the harmonizers and stuff that aren't as good, or you know, there's a lot of the ToneX and AmpliTube stuff isn't quite yet on the iPad. But if you are using an iPad, some people buy these devices where the audio interface and the iPad and the floor pedal are in one, and that seems like a great idea at the time, but it's just so much danger, you know. The singer could kick over a bottle of beer or somebody could braid the stage and you could be in big trouble. What's great about having the controller as the only thing on stage is these things are built to last. Unlike a quad cortex, it doesn't have the beer inlets. It is very, very resilient. It's very light and it's very safe. I can understand people that do this, that are using wired connections, that they would like to have the interface nearby. It makes sense. And to be honest, if the band and the gigs are relatively civilized, it should be okay. But ideally, if you can use wireless, it'll make you a better performer anyway if you're inclined to move around, because leads are terribly restrictive and somebody always falls over them and it's very risky to guitars. But it also means that all of this expensive stuff can just disappear somewhere else where it's safe and where, you know, it's less likely to be broken and all of that. So that's where I'm at now. I'll obviously be cutting in some nice videos of the gig here, which will be full of Queen music, which probably means I won't get any money for this video. Not that I get any money for any of them. But if you do like this type of content, I have a whole lot more coming, and I do offer my services to people that need help building rigs and tuning them for loud environments and building controlling stuff like that. So if you do need help, you can hire me. But also just to say that if you're happy with all of this stuff and all of the lovely free profiles and presets and stuff like that, you can also buy me a coffee by going to my website, brunkert.com, and there's a little coffee icon then on the bottom of the page, and I drink a lot of coffee, so any amount that you can spare is very welcome. So listen, thanks everyone for your support. If you have any questions or just something you want me to cover, or if you want me to just shut up and play my guitar, bang it into the thread below and I might read them and do what I'm told. Okay, take care folks.